Hello, everyone. We would like to extend a very warm welcome to you to this discussion, which will be centered around implementation of artificial intelligence, especially in radiology. And we'll also look at what are the obstacles surrounding the successful implementation of AI in radiology, and with emphasizing on the financial support aspect of it as well. My name is Prateek Bharadwaj. I'm part of the global market access function for radiology here at Bayer, and I'm joined by the amazing authors of this wonderful article that was published in NPJ Digital Medicine titled "To Pay or Not to Pay for Artificial Intelligence Applications in Radiology." Let me begin by a quick introduction of our speakers. Firstly, we have Franziska Lobisch. She is the Access Lead for Radiology within Bayer AG. In her role, she is responsible for pricing, evidence, and reimbursement strategies of the Bayer Radiology portfolio, including Calantic. Franziska has extensive experience in pricing, health economics, and stakeholder engagement of pharmaceutical products, and also holds a Master of Science in Public Health. We then have Dr. Ankur Sharma. He is the head of medical affairs for digital radiology at Bayer. He oversees the identification of clinical needs, assessment of algorithms, and support of medical device activities related to AI here. He has over a decade of experience in medical device industry as well. Then we have Dr. Oisin Butler. He is the integrated evidence generation lead for Bayer Radiology. He's responsible for strategy and execution of studies leveraging real-world data and real-world evidence, serving all the assets within the team of radiology. And finally, we have Michael Blankenburg, who is a health economic outcome research expert for radiology within Bayer. In his role, Michael is responsible for data-driven scientific and modeling approaches towards value evidence across portfolio of contrast media and clinical indications. It also includes digital solutions such as Calantic. Michael has a PhD in biochemistry, an MBA, a master's degree in public. All right, so let's begin. I would like to ask the speakers their individual perspective on what do you think is the role of AI in radiology? Ankur, can we start with you?
Sure. Before we even talk about AI in radiology, I think it's helpful to talk about just radiology as a starting point, right? Where is radiology now? And if you think about what's happening with imaging in either for diagnostic purposes, treatment, radiologists' workloads are increasing. That's a given across the modalities, whether you're doing MR, CT, X-ray, whatever it might be. And I think the number is somewhere around fivefold of increase of images per scan. So it's not even just the number of imaging procedures, but the number of images per scan are increasing because the technology from these CT and MR systems are getting better and better. So what happens with that is that now you have so many more images to go through, and the radiologists, the number of readers is about the same. They're not increasing at the same rate of scans, which means that you have fatigue from these readers. They're just not able to read as many scans as diligently in the same amount of time. So what you end up with then is potential for diagnostic errors, right? It's all correlated. If you have more images and you have less time to read them all, you're likely to miss something that's human error. So all these kinds of things are then adding up to burnout for radiologists. You get burnout from just, you have to do so much more in the same amount of time that there's an increase in the times that these readers are leaving radiology. And what does that mean then? That also translates to then adverse events and consequences for patients, right? If you don't get your scan read in time, then you might have delayed treatment. Or if you get something missed, that might be an incidental finding or diagnostic finding. By the time it gets caught on another thing, it might be delayed. So what does that then do? All of this cascades into a creation of a strain on the overall healthcare system, now that has to play catch up on patients when they come back for visits or so on. And I think these are the kinds of things that early on, where we are right now, AI has the ability to alleviate these challenges by helping radiologists with getting through scans, reducing errors, and helping manage their reading loads.
Thanks for that, Ankur. Oshin, would you like to bring in some of your thoughts as well, please?
Sure, thank you. I think Ankur's done a really nice job of outlining the clinical need and the clinical opportunity in AI. But I think what we're seeing is that need isn't yet being fully met, right? Despite advancements on the technological side. So AI has been around in radiology for quite some time. But we saw a significant shift around 2016 with the first FDA approval of an AI-based technology and a corresponding increase in AI-related publications in radiology-specific journals. So we're seeing this uptick in the number of publications, the number of applications being developed, and a change in the regulatory landscape or the availability of these applications in clinical practice. But despite these advancements in technology and the regulatory landscape, there are still significant barriers to adopting AI. And some of these are technical, some of these relate to lack of evidence, and some of these relate to lack of funding. So doing a little bit of a deeper dive in each of those individually, some of the technical challenges are, for example, the integration of AI applications into radiology workflows can be both complex and time-consuming. Users of AI software might resist to adopt these new ways of working that some of these applications require. And also interpretability. So this is commonly known sometimes as the black box problem. So due to their multi-layered design, it's difficult to explain or even really fully understand sometimes how algorithms reach their conclusions. So there is an understandable, I would say, hesitancy sometimes on the part of clinicians, of radiologists, in terms of understanding how the algorithm came to its decision and then being able to really assess the validity of that decision. So those are some of the technical challenges. Likewise, lack of evidence. So the studies used for regulatory approval are often what are known as retrospective reader studies. But payers and users want to see real-world evidence. How are these applications going to perform in their patient populations prospectively with larger numbers of patients, more diverse patients, and so on? And there just isn't that many of those publications available. So I think there's a lack of evidence, a lack of confidence, let's say, that the applications will really perform in the real world, potentially. There's also lack of funding, which is, I think, one of the main things we'll be talking about today. There's a lack of lack of quantified evidence, which I was relating to. We spoke already about the lack of evidence. This lack of evidence leads to issues with justification of the right price. So how do you justify the right price for these applications if there isn't enough evidence for payers and users to really assess the utility of these devices? Also, payers might consider investment in applications to be irrecoverable overheads that may not lead to additional revenue or sufficient cost savings. And there is also a corresponding lack of public funding sources to cover funding. So in those instances where the administrators or hospitals themselves don't see the benefit, public funding sources might be able to step in, but there's currently a lack of those.
Yeah. Interesting point, right? Oshin, you brought up this one point about lack of funding. And if I may, Francisca, you have extensive knowledge in pricing and reimbursement. Would you be able to help frame this topic for us a bit more, please?
I can certainly try. So in our today's healthcare systems around the world, providers basically receive reimbursement for the health services they provide to the patients, right? However, the current reimbursement structure typically does not yet account for variations in the quality of care they provide to their patients. So if you think about a radiology department, they do not receive additional payments for providing a higher quality interpretation, for example, for brain MRI or for less misdiagnosis, right? So hence, if an AI only improves the reading accuracy of a radiologist, currently, it's not getting paid for. Now, the fundamental problem with AI in radiology is that it is so new that currently there is no dedicated pathway for reimbursement. And since AI in radiology is not meant for direct patient contact. It's also not fitting into many typical reimbursement pathways or categories. So the closest workaround today is reimbursement through medical device pathways. In certain countries, that's possible. However, they have their own limitations. And I also outlined them on the slide that you can see here. So basically, if you think about the limitations, first of all, to be eligible for reimbursement under the current medical device pathway, new diagnostic information needs to be available. Yeah. So basically, information you as a human being would not have been able to derive from a certain imaging study. However, that in return means there is no payment for improved accuracy, and there is no payment for efficiency gains. Now, in some of the existing pathways, manufacturers also cannot even apply for coding or for reimbursement changes, but they have to rely upon hospitals and medical societies. If you think about the US, in order to receive a new CPT code, so a current procedural code, basically the American College of Radiology needs to make an application to the American Medical Association, and achieving or getting a CPT code is really only the first step in getting reimbursement. In Germany, quite similar, if you want to actually get payment under the Uniform Assessment Standards, and those are called EBM numbers in Germany. To apply for those, you must be a member of the Federal Joint Committee, so the GBA in Germany. So that is sick funds, it's physician or hospital associations, it might be a patient organization, but definitely not a manufacturer. Many of the pathways that are around have time-limited reimbursement. So if you think for the in the US, it would be the New Technology Add-on Payment, which stands short for NTAP. That's an additional add-on payment for inpatient procedures. However, the time period for payment is really restricted to 3 years. That's not all limitations, there's more. So I already mentioned that many of those existing pathways are not fit for purpose, right? Because basically AI as it's built today is really not eligible by the current laws and rules. So if you think about the new payment in Germany, that's the new examination and treatment payment, which is very similar to the transitional pass-through payment in the US, the TPTP. They only provide payment for new technology when it is invasive, when it has like direct patient contact and is used for one patient only. So the idea is to have innovation payment for like, I don't know, pacemakers, new surgery techniques. But you can see from that definition that it's definitely not fitting AI for radiologists at all. And last but not least, and that's also what Oisin alluded to very briefly, the payer evidence standards actually often fail to account for the unique challenges for medical devices in general, but also for AI specifically, because of, for example, the quicker life cycle. So unlike pharmaceuticals, medical devices and also AI can undergo rapid iterations and updates, and it's actually quite difficult to generate sufficient long-term data. Also, those AIs or some medical devices are more used in the very immediate detection and diagnosing of a disease rather than monitoring them over time and even like monitoring the treatment outcomes over time, right? And last but not least, you already have that in the pharmaceutical business, but for medical devices and AI even more. The data and evidence you need for the regulatory approval is not sufficient for payers. That means we need at least 2 trials. And with the lack of funding, there's also a lack of adoption, and there is also the lack of revenue, if you want so, in order to fund those trial costs. Now, I just realized that I went into a lot of detail when you actually asked me to frame the topic. So let me try one more time to maybe zoom out a bit and try to frame it again without unnecessary details. So if you think about reimbursement of AI, it's really important to understand that not all AI solutions are the same. Some primarily benefit the provider by, for example, improving efficiency, improving the cost base, while other AI solutions really focus on enhancing the patient outcomes, which then benefits primarily the payers or the patients. For example, an AI which could help reducing invasive procedures like coronary angiography sounds amazing for a payer and the patient. However, on the flip side, you may reduce the overall revenue of a hospital by implementing it. So the lack of reimbursement and the lack of funding for AI poses a challenge that hospitals naturally may prioritize implementation of AI based on their own financial motivation rather than improving long-term patient outcomes or healthcare system costs. With all of the challenges I outlined before, that basically leads to 6 algorithms being reimbursed in the entire world right now from more than 300 plus regulatory approved applications worldwide. So the lack of funding, if you ask me, poses a substantial hurdle for advancing AI in radiology, because without the adequate resources and funding, we as manufacturers face challenges in developing and refining AI algorithms, acquiring the large and necessary diverse data sets for the training, or conducting the robust clinical trials. And without all of that, this then in return hampers the progress and delays the realization of AI's full potential in improving patient care.
Yeah, brilliant insights, Franzi. Thanks a lot for this comprehensive overview. If we zoom back a bit more and look at a more general approach, would one of you be able to maybe give us some additional insights on what do you think are the motivation for a hospital to implement AI, not only for their patient outcomes, but also for efficiency-related outcomes?
Yeah, maybe I can comment. I think Franzi did a great job giving a big overview there and getting into some of the details, but maybe to think about it a little bit differently in terms of who really benefits from these scenarios of efficiency, right? And you have to consider basically 3 buckets is how I would think about it. Is that there's the provider. You know, the provider would be the reader themselves, the healthcare. Then there's the patient. Obviously, we have to make sure that the patient is in the center there, that they're the focus. What are we doing for this patient? And then there's the payer. Who's paying for these services? And then that payer piece varies a little bit based on healthcare system and country you're in, but essentially somebody has to pay for all this. And if you put those 3 on a scale, right, depending on what efficiency you're gaining, there will be a varying benefit for those 3 groups, right? So the easiest way to do this is maybe just think about them in examples, right? So if we say, let's increase the efficiency for the reader. Okay, well, who does that really benefit? What is the benefit there? And the benefit is really for primarily the reader, right? And the provider can get more reads done in an amount of time, because if you reduce the amount of time that they're spending per scan, and so if you reduce that time or automate reading aspects, they benefit greatly. The patient still benefits because they can get their treatment sooner, or they get results sooner, they understand what's happening to them sooner. But what does it really change for the payer? It's not a drastic change for the payer, because the payer was going to pay for that treatment or that diagnosis anyways, whether it happens in 30 minutes or 1 hour or a day, very limited impact to them. Now, if you shift it to maybe efficiency in the diagnosis side, right? Did you detect something sooner? Did you diagnose something sooner? Now the shift of that benefit goes to the payer, right? Because now they can pay for an intervention earlier. They may not be paying for something chronic when they can treat something acute. The amount of the intervention and payment required shifts. So they, as the payer, benefit by getting diagnoses and detection done earlier. The patient still benefits, right? The patient benefits from getting earlier intervention, but the provider may not have the same impact, because they're still going to have done all that work It's just a matter of did they do it then? It's not a significant impact outside of maybe just their reading time. So there's that. And then there's what happens if you create an efficiency in the diagnostic pathway itself, and in terms of reducing maybe some of the invasive procedures or having to do multiple studies along the way to come up with one finalized diagnosis. The payer benefits from that, right? Because you reduce the number of payments for confirmation of a diagnosis. The patient benefits from maybe having to do less tests or invasive procedures, and shifting some of those procedures from a diagnosis to maybe a treatment has a better outcome for them. But at the end of the day, from our perspective and where we talk about in radiology, that's not really an impact to the reader. The provider as a healthcare system may have some impact, but that's different than what we're talking in here in terms of the impact of the reader. And that maybe not. So as you can see, there's these different categories. And if you think about them in terms of what is the efficiency being gained and who is benefiting, you kind of get a different matrix of who benefits from what. And that's kind of another aspect of this that we really have to consider when we talk about the value propositions for AI and reimbursement challenges.
Michael, we haven't heard from you in a while. Would you be able to give some inputs?
I fully agree with what Anka said, and also thank you very much, Franziska, for your overview and the insights. I can echo that. Let's take the perspective of the payer for a while. So clearly, one must understand that the payers have the mandate to improve the health of patients, yet within reasonable economic boundaries. In healthcare, as we know it, the value lies in achieving patient-relevant outcomes and the cost of delivering those outcomes. So value can be generated either by increasing a patient-relevant endpoint, such as with stroke triage applications, or by significantly reducing costs while maintaining the same outcomes, as seen, for instance, with AI solutions that are used to visualize coronary arteries, which then help avoid invasive and expensive heart procedures. So here, I think it's rather unlikely that a public payer would be willing to pay a radiology department just for efficiency gains. It's comparable with an employer paying an employee, just for doing and completing a job in 7 hours instead of 8 hours. So payers are more concerned with the overall outcomes that are achieved, while a reasonable cost is met. Although efficiency gains in radiology workflow can potentially lead to faster diagnoses, reduced radiologist burnout and decreased errors, for instance, proving these outcomes directly, for instance, through clinical trials, is a challenging task.
Yeah, and let me jump in here. I 100% agree with what you said, Michael, right? However, it's also important to understand not everything is black and white, right? There is different countries, as Anko also mentioned, with the different specifications, and there is some healthcare systems, like, for example, UK, they're entirely state-funded, right? And in these entirely state-funded healthcare systems, maybe even the healthcare system is benefiting from efficiency gains because they can reduce the wait times. So in some markets, payers might also think about funding efficiency in the future, whereas typically, as Michael just outlined, they're typically paying for improving patient-relevant endpoints.
Yeah, we're getting into an interesting topic here, right? Let's dig a bit deeper. Franzi, if I can continue with you, can we go deeper into understanding the existing medical device reimbursement pathways, and what do you think are the challenges when you use that for reimbursement in AI?
Yeah, so I think I already mentioned some of it before, right? There is no dedicated AI pathway yet. In absence of dedicated AI pathways, you can basically use the medical device pathways, but they have their own limitations. Currently, for the 6 algorithms reimbursed, they actually split across 3 countries. So we only see 3 countries in the world that currently have AI reimbursed as medical devices. And that's US, UK, and Japan. And I already mentioned that typically radiology procedures are reimbursed by a very specific code, like a CPT code in the US or the EBM number in Germany. In the inpatient market, that's often diagnosis-related groups, so DRG rates. Now, these coding systems are set up that they basically cover already today all procedures provided in, for example, the outpatient sector. Yeah. Therefore, if you have a new service that or an AI or a service that already has an existing code and that actually cannot be brought into the existing reimbursement system. Sounds maybe complicated, and all the same, let me try to give you an example here. You already have a code or a reimbursement code for contrast enhanced brain MRI. If you now have an AI which makes you read multiple sclerosis cases better, this would be covered by an existing code already of reading the brain MRI. So similar to you're not getting better reimbursement rates if one radiologist has better reading performance than another one, in the system, there is really no room for paying for better diagnostics or better accuracy. If, however, that AI provides new diagnostic information, which has not been covered by the existing code, like the example Michael just brought up, assessing the fractional flow reserve on a CT rather than a coronary angiography. This enables a new code because it's an entirely new service that has not been coded before, and therefore you can get separate reimbursement. As stated before, in a lot of countries like Germany, a manufacturer can not even ask for a code to be generated. So this can only be done by clinical and medical societies. And we also have to say that in order for those three markets to get anything reimbursed, the manufacturer actually needed to provide randomized clinical trials with a focus on patient-relevant endpoints in order to make that happen.
Yeah, Franzi, I think that was great. One maybe additional piece to that is the time. People who aren't in the mix, so to speak, may not realize the time required. When you're in a prospective payment system like in the US, just incorporating the cost increases for the new technologies that we're talking about, like AI, just that in itself can easily take 2 to 3 years, right? So from actually starting to, by the time they're accounted for, so if we're here in 2023, you add 3 years, that means something comes out now and you start using it for 3 years, you may not get any sort of cost increase associated from a payer side, right? But then a great point with the codes as well, right? So even if you did something new, the codes are only going to be increased if radiologists actually adopt the AI on a broad scale so that you can identify it with an individual cost per procedure. So it's not necessarily just having all the mechanics behind it, but the timeline of when these things get executed is really important. And I think in prospective payment systems, you've said it a few times, is that we're looking for outcomes-based evidence, right? So there's a part of that where we have to consider really how do we create, this required outcomes-based evidence to implement something for reimbursement without considering how these modern technologies actually work in clinical practice. Because your point about the outcome is not necessarily always directly linked is valid. There's still a benefit as to like what I was trying to say earlier, right? Depending on whether you're patient, payer, provider, there's still a benefit. But where does that reimbursement payment come from in a prospective payment system is challenging, especially when you have a multiple year roadmap to get into that, right?
Right. I only can echo this, Ankara. So I have to say this is maybe the position of the payer I take here just for the sake of the discussion today. We have a bit of a chicken and egg problem here. Payers only acknowledge evidence of benefits of AI technology in outcomes decreases and or cost reduction once it is fully adopted by most radiologists. Once guidelines have changed, once clinical communities are fully behind the new technology. But this is all before reimbursement will be in place. So in order to generate this evidence and to adopt the technology broadly, initial reimbursement would be a great facilitator. So reimbursement ideally should be there first rather than coming last.
Yeah, you're right, Michael. I mean, the evidence for reimbursement itself varies, right? Payers themselves don't have consistent data or evaluation criteria, right? How do you evaluate so many algorithms in the same way? In the UK, the National Institute of Healthcare Excellence, NICE, they require RCTs, right? That's their standard approach. In the US, as Franzi mentioned earlier, we have this new technology add-on payment, the NTAP pathway, and that requires some demonstration of improvement of patient outcomes, but it may not necessarily fit with diagnostic devices, because you're not necessarily linking always to outcomes based on what you're diagnosing and where you are in the pathway. Not to mention that these NTAP, the NTAP payments are for a limited period of time, Michael, to your point, but at least it gives you some starting point, right? And I think if you look at some of the applications that have reimbursement, and you just look at the data that they have provided, you'll see a great range in terms of the evidence to reimbursement. But at the end of the day, payers are really looking for this clinical utility. Like, what are you changing in the treatment pathway that then leads to improved patient outcomes? And not only that you know that algorithms now can detect more, but that it leads to better treatment choices or directly leads to patient impact, right? So it's a little bit of a convoluted mental problem. So maybe we can do it as an example, right? If you take breast cancer screening, and there's quite a few AI applications out there that are used for breast cancer screening, the 10-year survival rate is around 80 some odd percent, maybe 85, 84%. And there's already in a lot of countries yearly screening programs. Now, if you say that, okay, now that because I have an AI program that can detect earlier let's say you detect 20% more lesions, is there any evidence that you can create that has a direct link from those newfound lesions that you might detect the 20% that they are definitely going to develop into a cancer? That can you confirm that those lesions would not have been detected in another screening round or another screening methodology if they got bigger, or they were easily seen in a... These are the kinds of challenges that we have to consider when we're thinking about the evaluation of evidence and the linking of reimbursement in AI.
Let me jump in here, because that's actually my favorite example. I think there is something in between detecting more lesions and showing an increase in 10-year overall survival, right? So there's something in between. And for the record, I 100% agree that an algorithm needs to show clinical utility if you even want to be considered for reimbursement from a payer perspective. So that's agreed. However, for breast cancer specifically, this shows one fundamental challenge. Does a new diagnostic intervention really need to show the impact on the patient outcome when it's a so long-term, confounded with treatment choice, patient compliance, and so many other factors that the best diagnosis in the world really could not influence? Or should a digital diagnostic only be responsible to show the effect on the possibility of better treatment choice, for example, through better staging, which then in itself would change patient trajectory? So to be very specific here, if an algorithm for breast cancer can show that you find more cancer at an earlier stage, rather than focusing on lesion detection, I really think that should suffice. Silence.
Totally agree.
I don't disagree.
Yeah. I think when we think about the evidence needed to support this, right? When we think about how do we generate that evidence, what evidence would be convincing, right, to payers and users? we can think about, well, we know RCTs, right? RCT, randomized controlled trials, are the gold standard in pharmaceuticals. But for radiology AI applications, I think payers would need to recognize that high quality real world studies will also play a role in generating robust evidence and supporting decision making, right? And using the US as an example, and thinking about the kind of disconnect, if you like, between the types of studies used in regulatory approval and maybe what payers would need to see in order to justify, paying for these applications. Firstly, the types of evidence required for regulatory approval vary depending on the algorithm's classification. So we have what are known as CAD-T devices, computer-aided triage and notification devices, and these are purely aimed to and purely intended to aid in the prioritization and triage of radiological medical images. And these only require standalone assessment, so software-only assessment, comparing the algorithm's performance, so sensitivity, specificity, and so on, against a standard of truth. So you have these software-only assessments for triage tools. Alternatively, you have computer-aided detection and diagnosis devices, CAD-E, CAD-X devices, and for these types of devices for regulatory approval, often a retrospective reader study is required. So this is a surrogate for a field test, a prospective field test, and a retrospective reader study aims to assess the impact of the device on the user or the reader by comparing the unaided performance of the reader to the performance of the reader aided by the device, using retrospectively collected cases and often an enriched population. And then for reasons we can understand of logistics and cost, both the numbers of cases and the numbers of readers tend to be low and powered more for statistical significance rather than clinical significance. But these types of regulatory studies, standalone assessments and retrospective reader studies, still leave the end user or payer with significant unanswered questions regarding the real world performance of the tool, which then can only be addressed with high quality real world studies. When thinking about this, developing long-term evidence regarding impact on clinical outcomes may also be challenging for some diagnostic applications, as Francie's been referring to. So if this requires patients to be followed through diagnosis, treatment, and subsequent clinical outcomes, this may take years to develop, and there are so many additional variables in play that generating compelling evidence might be very challenging. So here, retrospective analysis of longitudinal real-world data could help define the current clinical pathways and outcomes for these patient populations, and then prospective longitudinal observational studies could be conducted once the device is available and potentially once it's some reimbursement is available, so there's actually uptake, not just availability, but uptake in clinical practice, to demonstrate the impacts, the device's impact on clinical outcomes, to aid in discussions with payers. So, for example, over the 3-year period that a device may be covered by this new technology add-on payment, this NTAP payment, a temporary payment for novel healthcare services, we might look to really focus evidence generation in this 3-year period, this prospective evidence generation in this 3-year period, to then go back to payers after that period and leverage that real world data to secure longer term funding. Yeah, I think that was just a point quickly on the types of evidence we can think about, what's available in terms of regulatory, and then where are the gaps there and how could we potentially address those gaps.
Sounds terrific, Eugene. Thanks for laying that out. But I have to spike in a little bit a quantity of reality. In reality, there is a specific challenge to radiology AI applications, as I understand it, because they do not typically have strong intellectual property benefits, similar to what we have in the pharmaceutical world. And then in addition comes the payment pathways with their uncertainty. So in the end, while there is a theoretical path that everybody can go down, the vendors may be unwilling or maybe even unable justify the costs associated with large randomized clinical trials. This is a problem that is still out there.
Wow, you guys are certainly experts, and you're living up to it, right? So just to help everyone, let's quickly recap on what we just discussed, right? To start off with, AI implementation entails 2 additional costs, but then prospective payment systems are slow in adapting these changes. The current reimbursement pathways lack the suitability, and there is an absence of established evidence, which are which are there to guide you as standards. Clinical applications in AI may not directly benefit hospitals, contributing to resistance from radiologists in adopting these technologies. And lastly, the point that you guys brought about is about healthcare systems and particularly the patients who are deprived of various benefits that AI applications can create because of these. Ankur, firstly you, and then Franzi maybe. Did I miss something in this recap?
I don't think you missed anything, but maybe something that we discussed briefly, but maybe we didn't lean into enough that I want to make sure that we highlight is that the lack of reimbursement is also inhibiting the progress and stifling innovation from allowing patients to access all these advanced diagnostic technologies. When you reimburse AI in radiology, it's crucial to protect the manufacturers, and especially a lot of these are small startups, to allow them to have these innovative ideas and build a technology that we want to use. Without the proper financial support and incentives, those small companies, they are going to continue to face challenges in developing and implementing these transformative solutions. And they need to show income. They cannot survive without it. And that's why this action is needed now, to establish a comprehensive reimbursement framework that incentivizes an investment in these companies and the technology that they're providing, that ensures that patients receive this high quality care from this new technology. It's an important sub point that I just want to make sure that we highlight, Pradeep.
Yeah, and I mean, I could not agree more, right? With hundreds of FDA-approved AI applications, but only 6 being paid for, I think it's very clear that the current reimbursement system falls short in recognizing the broader benefits of AI in radiology, and I think it's about time to envision a new reimbursement pathway that can unleash the tremendous benefits for patients, radiologists, but also healthcare systems. So let's reconstruct the future of radiology, because I mean, I truly believe that everybody should be informed about their health.
Golden words. All right. We have defined the problem beautifully now, right? Let's maybe get into understanding what can be done. In your paper, you not just provide a framework for understanding AI, but you've also expanded on its various components. Would you take turns in explaining the framework and the key elements included in it? Franzi, would you like to start?
Yes, sure. Let me start by saying finding a new reimbursement pathway for AI in radiology will be a balancing act. If you reimburse too many applications, that increases the budget impact tremendously, right? But if you reimburse too little of them, that may hamper the adoption, as we've just heard. So if you want to balance that, and if you want to think about it, there's actually 2 themes you need to think about it. We've heard that a lot of in our problem statements. Firstly, not all AI is the same. Some AI applications benefit only providers, not the patients, not the payers, while others, and especially those that reduce costs to the payer, could also decrease the provider revenue. So not all AI is the same. Secondly, too high evidence standards may inhibit the innovation, whereas too loose evidence standards increase also the uncertainty and the value that AI brings, right? So in our article, we therefore have proposed a framework that payers can use to determine the reimbursability of radiology AI applications, consisting of exactly those 2 dimensions. What is the nature of the benefit, and what is the evidence that's there in order to convince the payer of the existence of that very benefit? And you can see that also outlined here on the slide. So maybe to be very clear about it, yeah, and try to also give you some examples in developing criteria to determine which radiology AI applications to pay for. We believe that there are 2 aspects that payers must consider: nature of the benefit, and as discussed before, applications are very heterogeneous in their nature. They offer a broad range of benefits, and also it varies in who will benefit from it. Therefore, you really have to consider who is the stakeholder who benefits from the application. The second key aspect is the availability then of evidence to support the existence of this benefit. It's really reasonable to expect from payers that they want to have evidence to go all the way down to improve patient performance, right? However, we also said so often why this may not the case. So we really propose a framework when to really ask for it and when to maybe not ask for it. I don't want to say rather trust, but if you can be sufficiently certain that the evidence is there or the benefit can be provided by finding cancer earlier and instead of going all the way down to outcomes, this is what we're looking for evidence. Now, in order to make that more tangible, let me be clear with a few examples. And we're now looking into the lower left quadrant. Applications that improve efficiency only will not need additional payment because providers have incentives to adopt them anyway. Yeah, an algorithm that reduces the scan time can provide efficiency gains for the provider, especially if there is no evidence which then can be connected to direct or indirect improvement in clinical utility. There should really be no separate reimbursement. As said before, like in the UK, there might be some exceptions for this. If you can really help reducing the wait times and show broader societal benefits, but those also should be demonstrated either in a trial or at least modeled in a health economic model, and then maybe and just maybe a separate payment may be warranted. And I mean, we discussed that lengthy before. So there should be the possibility for those efficiency-driven algorithms to achieve reimbursement. However, we also believe that the number of those algorithms might be like super low, and if higher, then it's very country-specific. So I think I talked enough. Oisin, maybe you want to take it over for the other two quadrants?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, you're doing great, but let me jump in. So the other two quadrants are for improved diagnostic performance or new diagnostic information. So for these types of applications, rather than to the provider, the benefit is primarily to the healthcare system and the patient. And we've talked about these earlier in this presentation. So these applications do need separate reimbursement because the providers won't be incentivized to adopt them because the benefits they're bringing are these large societal benefits to the patient or the healthcare system rather than the provider themselves. They're not workflow efficiency improvements. So for reimbursement of these types of devices, which will likely form the lion's share of the total algorithms on the market. The question here is, what is the right level of evidence? So if you have direct evidence like stroke triage from an RCT, there are some out there showing improvement in patient outcomes, we consider it that it must be paid separately. So that's C. However, we also strongly encourage payers to think about some cases where you do not need to go down the route of patient relevant outcomes. So there may be some circumstances where payers may have to consider paying separately, even without clinical evidence or very robust clinical evidence being available. And Franzi talked a little bit about trust. So, for example, an application that increases cancer detection at an earlier stage should not also have to prove that increased detection improves clinical outcomes, since this has already been established. So the trials or the evidence generated specifically for that algorithm can really focus on the algorithm or the application increases cancer detection at an early stage without needing to generate that additional longitudinal data to show that will lead to an eventual reduction in cancer or death. Likewise, if you have new diagnostic information like coronary flow measurement on CT or non-invasive quantification of liver pathologies, which can reduce the need for invasive follow-up imaging or biopsies, they're the benefits really for the patient, or there's new diagnostic information available. Here again, perhaps you don't need these large RCTs or very longitudinal studies showing explicitly the benefit for patients, because we can take it as read that if we can demonstrate it within this stage, so to speak, or within a study, you can demonstrate that there's new information available or that the number of additional assessments is reduced, then the benefit to the patient is clear and we don't need additional evidence there. Does that roughly capture it, Francie?
Yep. Thank you.
Great. They say simpler the better sometimes. It's amazing how the framework you guys have developed is simple, straightforward, but yet super comprehensive, and it brings out the point that's required. Apart from the framework, Michael, let me turn to you. Is there anything you think the payers should consider that may not be captured or in the framework already?
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk processes. In the healthcare system, as we know it, we have all what is needed for the healthcare providers and the medical associations if they wish to initiate reimbursement requests. But what's about the AI technology developers and providers? I wish the payers would consider modifying their processes in such a way that those AI technology developers and providers also could make a direct reimbursement request, not being dependent on the healthcare providers or medical associations that I mentioned before. Well, that's something we really need to revolutionize, if I may say so.
Yeah, beautifully put, Michael. Okay, let's again zoom back a bit. In a more general sense of it, maybe if each one of you could take turns and explain what was your motivation behind writing this paper?
Well, if I may start, we did not want to stay at the sidelines and wait until others set the rules in digital AI applications in radiology. Rather, we wanted to be part of the discussion. So we hope that our research offers guidance to payers for setting their criteria that make reimbursement decisions transparent, predictable, and accessible for AI technology developers and vendors.
Yeah, and maybe I go next. How shall I say that? We are Bayer, okay? We are a life science company, and reimbursement is really in our genes. And as one of the only pharma companies in the AI radiology area, I think we even have the obligation to be part of the solution and also then reconstruct the future of tomorrow.
Yeah, really nice. Yeah, I mean, I totally share that position, but maybe from a slightly different perspective, from the real world evidence perspective, we are Bayer. We're a pharmaceutical company in the radiology space, and we bring with that a wealth of expertise in developing compelling observational research and real world evidence for regulators, for payers, for physicians and patients, both in diagnostics and therapeutics. And we have I think an opportunity, but also a responsibility to leverage this expertise also in the AI radiology space.
So I'll go last. I think physicians want to provide the best possible care for their patients, right? We know this. And we also know that healthcare systems are complex and challenging, and just how to navigate them as a patient to get answers about your own health can be really, really complicated and daunting. Additional complexity related to how reimbursement happens, the formularies by which insurances have testing, imaging, diagnoses, treatments performed. All these challenges have to be managed by a small group of people and patients and physicians and healthcare, all trying to do the same idea of delivering the best possible care and treatment for the patients, right? So we kind of have to change how we think about new technology, the payments, and it's important to anyone who wants to improve patient care and push for just better, newer innovation in healthcare.
First of all, thank you so much for your insights. I mean, this is super valuable. It's such an interesting topic. Everybody's talking about AI in healthcare today, but you guys managed to decipher the information in a way that's really valuable and insightful to everyone. Thanks a lot. Your paper did bring in a lot of questions from the audience who have already read that, and right now we're receiving a few questions as well. So if I may, I'm going to take a few questions and feel free to jump in. One of the questions were, I'm keen to broaden our understanding by exploring a global landscape. Could you kindly provide insights into how various countries are approaching AI and reimbursement in the field of radiology particularly? Are there any examples that you would be able to quote where a successful, effective reimbursement framework has been used to bring in this domain?
Yeah, maybe I take that one. So I think I've been rather clear, right? There is no clear reimbursement pathway yet for AI in any country. We have seen here and there some countries, I think like latest even Belgium and also Taiwan thinking about new frameworks, but still there's nothing there. In the UK, you actually has as one of the little countries, they are trying to bring a new reimbursement pathway forward, and I don't know whether it was a quick fix or not, but you have something called MedTech funding mandate. Yeah. For the MedTech funding mandate, you can also have AI for radiologists reimbursed, but it's actually even more challenging to qualify for reimbursement compared to a pharmaceutical drug, because you have to meet 2 additional criteria. So first of all, you have to meet the NICE appraisal, and then additional 2 criteria in order to achieve payment or coverage. And also in addition, in order to get to reimbursement in any of those markets, you really need randomized clinical trials with patient-relevant endpoints. And that's not going to be sustainable in the long run. However, we also have seen some countries getting super innovative in bridging this funding gap and really promoting innovation. For example, UK again, they just allocated, although they already have a pathway, yeah, but they just allocated 21 million pounds for a 2-year rollout for artificial intelligence in radiology across the entire NHS. And that funding really aims to support the adoption of diagnostic AI with a focus on chest X-ray and stroke triage applications to ultimately improve health and patient care. So yes, frameworks for AI technology are still developing globally. Sometimes they're not even thought of, yeah, but you can also clearly see that that payers are thinking into that direction and really want to invest in AI innovation and drive the benefits for patients and healthcare.
Interesting. UK is leading the race for now then, yeah?
Yes.
All right. Let me again, sticking to the theme of generalization and zooming out. Michael, I think you brought the point up, if I'm not wrong, about the chicken and egg problem here, right? Adoption versus reimbursement. Which should come first? We don't know. There's an issue in the process. Would you be able to help us understand how we can overcome the cycle? What do you think can be done?
I think it's fair to lament for a while about that, but one always should find a solution here. And a path would be that we could solve this chicken and egg problem in a way that really engages into collaborative efforts. Efforts where we have the 4 key players together: the manufacturers, the clinicians, the payers, regulators. So how would that be like? So the startups and AI technology providers could play a starting role, which is the pivotal role, by working closely together with clinical communities to generate first real-world evidence that Oisin always mentioned here. This first real-world evidence would then, in an ideal situation, showcase the benefits of their applications, not only focusing on clinical outcomes, but also demonstrating economic and patient-relevant values, the currency that the payers are interested to see. Now, by engaging payers early on in this evidence-generating process, those AI solutions could be then recognized by the payers for their robust positive impact on patient care and on the healthcare system. So you have to do this right, with the right breadth and depth. While this evidence would then be more and more established, payers and regulators could then start to issue appropriate reimbursement pathways, and they could do this earlier. And by that, they could create what we could consider a self-reinforcing, a virtuous circle for wider adoption, and by that also support, on a global dimension, so to say, continued innovation of AI solutions in radiology. That's my hope. And I would love to hear other suggestions, if there were any.
Well, there might be even a quicker way than real world evidence, right? You could try to fill the evidence with a health economic model, which is very accepted in some countries like UK, not so much accepted in other parts of the world. But if you sufficiently model or like can model the impact of a potential study design to the entire patient pathway, then maybe we should also consider accepting health economic models rather than, or modeled pathways rather than big RCTs or the real world evidence labs.
Yeah, let's maybe stick to that point, Franzi. Let's have a quick discussion on this point. We're market access people. We like reimbursement. Would you have any insights or even as far as going recommendations to the policymakers out there to maybe what should be done to bring in and establish more effective reimbursement pathways?
Yeah, sure. So I think policymakers, they absolutely play a crucial role, right, in generating effective reimbursement pathways, even setting the right regulatory boundaries. Yeah, I think first of all they should read our paper because there everything is in that. So there is the criteria, right? About think about the different nature of the benefits, and also think about whether it always needs to go down all the way to randomized clinical trial. And I think the most important piece for policymakers is bring stakeholders and people involved in that to one table and foster a dialogue. Yeah, talk to payers, the app developers, bring the policymakers themselves, the regulatory agencies, bring hospitals, yeah, bring patients, and let's try to figure this out together, because I think we all have different views on the whole thing and different parts that are important to us, but there should be an open dialogue about it and the willingness to change.
Wow, well said. Okay, we're almost at time, but maybe for those who haven't spoken yet, if you would like to add just a few more things about what can be done next to real-world evidence to fill these evidence gaps that we currently have.
Well, I can jump in since Franzi and Michael got the first two questions. I was feeling a little left out. Yeah, just another topic from the evidence gap side. I think, resource allocation, right? We have to think about these economic models and how they can help determine the optimal allocation of resources. So that includes, the AI technology, but where does it fit within the radiology workflow in the radiology department? And we have to consider factors like the actual cost of the technology, the personnel that are required, the training that goes into getting those people to use the technology, right? And then there's also the aspect of, are we trying to fit all of this into the current workflow, or do we have to change the workflow, and how do we change it so that we create these models that enable these healthcare facilities, these provider sites, to really allocate their existing resources effectively, and then prioritize these AI implementations where they can provide the most value is to those kind of three pillars that we were talking earlier about: benefit for payer, patient, and then the provider side. So I think that the allocation of resources is something that we also have to really consider well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big proponent of real world evidence, but I don't want to give the impression that that's the only path, right? Of course, as Franzi mentioned, there's, health economic modeling really can and should play a significant role in the field of AI to address evidence gaps and provide these valuable insights, particularly in instances where either RCTs or RWE isn't feasible. Cost-effective analyses, right? Economic modeling can assess the cost effectiveness of AI technologies compared to existing approaches in radiology, and it can quantify the incremental costs and benefits of AI, such as improved diagnostic accuracy, reduced false positive rates, and decreased follow-up procedures. And this information helps decision makers understand the value proposition of AI solutions and then make informed decisions. And then finally, maybe comparative effectiveness. So here economic models can help compare the effectiveness of different AI technologies or algorithms in radiology. And then by evaluating clinical outcomes, costs, and other relevant parameters, these models enable clinicians and decision makers to identify which AI solutions are most beneficial in specific radiology applications. So still lots of opportunities beyond, RCT and RWE, but I think that the main point is that evidence is crucial in whatever form it takes.
Evidence is crucial, whatever form it takes. Brilliantly said, Oisin. Okay, we're at the top of the hour now. So as we reach our conclusion in this really insightful webinar, I would like to extend my heartiest gratitude to all of you for your amazing engagement, questions, and patient listening. Today, we traversed into a very, very intricate landscape of AI integration in healthcare. We shed light on what are the challenges that impedes successful implementation of AI in healthcare. Our panelists have provided profound insights, enabling us to better understand what are the barriers and how can we look at probably jumping through those barriers. Yeah, it is essential to recognize the potential AI has in healthcare and in radiology, in clinical decision making, in patient outcomes, and we must all strive together to bridge the implementation gaps that are there. Let's find new ways for reimbursement. Let's devise strategies to overcome these barriers, and together, our commitment and passion can be instrumental in shaping a better future for healthcare for sure. Thank you once again for joining us in this journey. Wish you all the best and continued success in your fruitful endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pratik.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.